Good morning, students. In the last class, we have discussed about plant tissues in detail. Now, in this session, we shall look on to the next important part of the tissues, that is known as animal tissues. Now, animal tissues are also very important as plant tissues. So, in animal tissues, all the cells are specialized to perform certain activities. So, based on the structure and the functions, animal tissues are classified into four major types. They are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscular tissue, nervous tissue. Now first we shall look into the epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is known as fundamental tissue in animals because it covers all external and internal surface of the body. It is also known as simplest animal tissue. When you observe this tissue in the microscope, the cells are compactly arranged. You can see the image of the epithelial tissue here. The cells are compactly arranged and no intercellular spaces can be seen. And this particular cells is resting on a matrix. It is present on a layer which is known as a basement membrane. On the surface of the basement membrane, we can see the cells which are compactly arranged without having any intercellular spaces. That particular membrane or a layer is known as matrix. In other words, it is referred as basement membrane. Now, next important thing what we have to see here is where we can see this epithelial tissue in our body. First of all, we know that it is present entire part. Of course, entire body is going to be covered. But there are certain specialized epithelial tissues which are present in certain parts of the body. We shall look into that particular location now. They are present in skin. Of course, skin acts as a major part here because entire body is covered with skin. So obviously we see this epithelial tissue in the skin. Other than that, it is present in the parts of the alimentary canal, which means they are present in the organs of the digestive system, that is lung, alveoli, then lining of respiratory tract, kidney tubules, urinary tract, reproductive tract, blood vessels, and different types of glands. In all these areas, we can see this particular epithelial tissue. Now, next important thing is its functions. So, what are the functions of epithelial tissue? As we know, it helps in protection, it helps in absorption, which means it is responsible for absorbing certain materials into the body. That means especially we can give an example here in case of digestion. So during the digestion process, the small intestine is going to absorb the digested food. So that absorption of digested food is done by the small intestine because they have a special structures called villi. But in that villi, we can see the presence of these epithelial cells which helps in absorption. In the same manner, it also helps in excretion. That's why we can see this particular cell in the kidney, as I mentioned already. So it is present in kidney tubules, which means that they help in excretion, as well as it also helps in exchange of gases, which we see in alveoli in lungs. So like this, we can see this epithelial tissue present in different areas performing different functions. Next, we shall look into the classification of this epithelial cells. How actually it is classified. So based on different parameters, the epithelial tissues are classified into different types. Let's see what are those different types of epithelial tissues. First important parameter is arrangement of layers. How actually the epithelial cells are present. So depending upon that particular thing, we can classify the epithelial cells into simple epithelial, stratified epithelial. Another important parameter is cell shapes. First is arrangement of layers, how actually the cells are, whether it is in single layer or more than one layer. So depending upon this criteria, we say that it is simple or stratified. Now another parameter is based on the shapes, because epithelial cells differ in shapes. See, the epithelial cells of alveoli may differ in the epithelial cells of kidney. It may differ. Though it is present entire body, the cells shapes may differ from organ to organ. So depending upon these shapes of the cells, we can classify them as squamous epithelial cells, columnar epithelial cells, then cuboidal epithelial cells. Similarly, we have another important parameter which is known as functions. So what actually the epithelial cells is going to perform, as we already know now, I have told it helps in absorption, it helps in transportation, it helps in excretion, it helps in protection. Like that we have different functions of epithelial cells. So depending upon these functions, the epithelial cells are classified as sensory epithelium, ciliated epithelium and glandular epithelium. So in this way we can classify the epithelial cells in different categories. So these discussions we shall discuss in the next coming slides. Now first we shall look into this arrangement of layers first. As I told, based on the arrangement of layers, how the cells can be seen. Let us see the image now. See here. So this is what the arrangement, as you already seen in the image, certain cells are arranged in single layer. Certain cells are having more than one layer. You can witness this particular thing. So second part of the image is telling about the arrangement of layers of cell. So as you have seen, simple epithelial where we can see only the one layer of cells are going to be present. Whereas in stratified, we can see many layers of cells are going to be present. So this is how we can classify them, how actually the cells are arranged in the organs of the body, whether it is single or whether it is multiple. So if it is single, it is called as simple. If it is more than one, it is called as stratified. So in that we can classify them as simple squamous, stratified squamous, simple columnar, stratified columnar, simple cuboidal, stratified cuboidal, like that how the cells are arranged. So based on that we can give the name as simple or stratified to the shape of the cells. Next, another category is based on the shape of the cells, now as I already know. Now here the first important type of the cell on the based on the shell shapes is squamous epithelial cells. Squamous epithelial cells, as the name indicates, squama refers to what we can see soft or we can see flat. So the cells which are present as a form of flattened nature, which is present in the form of flat, we call them as what we call squamous. Squama refers to flat. It is also called as pavement epithelial cells. You can see the image of this squamous epithelium now. It can be seen like what we call the flattened nature, and this is also similar to the pavement layer. Why it is called as pavement layer? Because when you walk in the footpath or when you walk in the when you can witness the stones how actually they are arranged in the pedestrian walk side. So you can see the footpath, and footpath layer is having many layers of stones, or it can have single layer of stones which is flattened in nature. So that particular is referred as what we call, it is very similar to what we call the squamous epithelial cells. So squama refers to the flat, and that's why it's also referred as pavement epithelial cells. We can see this particular squamous epithelial cells in again the lung alveoli, Bowman's capsule which is present in kidneys, blood capillaries, pharynx, skin, etc. In all these regions we see these squamous epithelial cells which are flat in nature. And what's the function of these epithelial cells? Actually, the functions are the protection. It helps in protection. It helps in exchange of materials. It helps in exchange of gases. It also helps in filtration. Next type of tissue is cuboidal epithelial cells. Cuboidal, as the name indicates, it is cube shape. You can see the image here now. It is in the form of cube shaped cells. It is present in the uriniferous tubules, salivary glands, thyroid glands, pancreas, etc. It helps in secretion, it helps in excretion, it also helps in absorption process. Another type of the epithelial tissue is columnar epithelial cells. Columnar, as the name indicates, it is column shape. Column in the sense it is pillar shape. It is like what we call tall cells. You can see the image here which is almost in the form of a taller cells. They are pillar like cells. That's why they are called as columnar epithelial cells, and they are present in stomach, intestine, epiglottis, etc. And they also helps in absorption and protection. Next is based on functions. They can be classified as sensory epithelium, ciliated epithelium and glandular epithelium cells. As the name indicates, sensory means they are present in sense organs. So when they are present in sense organs means what actually it will do, it pick up the stimulus. Whatever we take the stimulus from the external surrounding, those stimulus are received by these sensory epithelial cells which are present on the sense organs. So the cells which are present on the sense organ is known as sensory epithelial cells. For example, you can give olfactory epithelium, taste buds, they are all examples for sensory epithelial cells. Next is ciliated epithelial cells. So ciliated epithelial cells are those cells which are in the form of cilia, which contains cilia. Because of the presence of cilia, these cells are very much responsible for the movement of materials. That's why I told several times epithelial cells are helps in exchange of materials. Epithelial cells are helps in movement of materials. Why? Because they contain cilia. Those cells which are having cilia, they help in this particular movement. Example is respiratory tract, intestinal glands, etc. Another important type of epithelial tissue is that glandular epithelial cells. So glandular means they are present in glands. Thyroid gland, sweat gland, and we have so many glands in our body. So those glands are lined with these epithelial cells, which are called as glandular epithelial cells, and they help in secretion of certain substances. So glands are the best example, because glands, what they will do, they secrete certain substances in the form of certain chemical substances. So those chemical substances which are very much important for the body to maintain all the activities in a proper way. So glands will secrete those things. So in the glands we see this particular tissue which are called as a glandular epithelial tissue. So this is how, based on functions, we can classify them as sensory, ciliated and glandular epithelial cells. Now, another important tissue what we see in the animal body and which is most abundant tissue is known as what we called connective tissue. It is very important. As the name indicates, connective tissue means it is going to connect the various parts of the body. In the body, there are so many parts are interconnected. All these interconnected parts is actually because of this connective tissue. The important feature of this connective tissue is that it contains a matrix which has the cells in that. So that means they have two important components here. One is the matrix, another one is the cell. So matrix is known as a non-living component and cells are the living component. So in the non-living component, we can see what we call the living component called as cells. That means exactly similar to the basement membrane what I told in the epithelial cells. The cells are actually landed on a particular layer which is known as basement membrane. In the same manner here also, the basement membrane what we can say are in the form of matrix. It may be different types of matrix. It may be a jelly-like, it may be fluid-like, it may be a rigid, it may be a dense. So we have different categories of the matrix can be identified. It's somewhat called as a non-cellular component. It's a jelly-like substance. In that we can see different cells are going to be scattered. And along with the cells, they also contain another important component which is known as fibers. In these tissues, the fibers are also plays a very important role. So this is the picture which you are going to see the connective tissue. You have seen the images, we can see the fibers here, and along with that we can see certain spots which are referred as cells. Okay, like this, in those cells and fibers what you are seeing in the image are actually present in a layer which is known as matrix. That is white background what you are seeing is the matrix, and in that matrix you can see so many fibers. Along with that we can see what we call the cell components. Now, connective tissues are also classified into different types based on the nature of matrix. So based on the nature of matrix, the connective tissues are categorized into three major types. So which is known as connective tissue proper, which contains the matrix in the form of jelly-like or a loose matrix, or it may be a dense matrix. If the matrix are in the form of jelly, if the matrix are in the form of loose, if the matrix are in the form of dense, we call that particular category of tissues as connective tissue proper. In the same manner, if the matrix is solid in nature, it is called as skeletal tissue. If the matrix is in the form of fluid, it is known as vascular tissue. So, connective tissues based on the matrix, it is classified as connective tissue proper, skeletal tissue and vascular tissue. And all these connective tissues will have different type of cells are going to be present. Now, we shall look into the main categories of the connective tissues in detail now, as I told already. So, based on these three different categories as I told, connective tissue proper, skeletal tissue and vascular tissues, what are the sub-connective tissues can be seen here. So, in the connective tissues, as I told, the matrix may be jelly or matrix may be loose or matrix may be dense. Based on that, we can have different categories of connective tissues proper, namely areolar tissue, number 1, adipose tissue, and third one is tendon, and fourth one is ligament. These four will come under the category of connective tissue. Similarly, If the matrix is very hard, it comes into the category of skeletal tissue, and that tissue includes one important is cartilage, another one is what we can say bone. Again, so based on the type of matrix which is fluid in nature, we call them as vascular tissue, which consists of blood, another one is lymph. In this way, we can categorize the connective tissues into different types depending upon the nature of matrix. Now let us come to the first important tissue, which is known as areolar tissue. You can look at the image of the areolar tissue here. So areolar tissue is once again considered to be as a simple connective tissue because it contains a jelly-like matrix which contains fibers as well as the cells. So I have given here certain name of the cells and the fibers. The fibers includes white fibers, collagen fibers, yellow fibers, elastin fibers, reticular fibers. Like that we can see different types of fibers in this tissue. Along with it, it also contains different type of cells like fibroblast, mast cells, plasma cells, macrophages and immunocytes. All these cells is going to perform different functions in this tissue, and moreover this tissue is known as areolar tissue because the tissue has so many air gaps between the cells and the fibers. That's why it is called as areolar tissue. Coming to the location where actually we see this tissue, it is present inside the organs, around the blood vessels, muscles, nerves and below the skin. What are its functions? It provides packing material in various organs, it binds the various structures with one another, and it gives protection. It also helps in defense mechanism. It also protects the body against various infections. Next important tissue is adipose tissue. So why it is called as adipose? You are seeing the image of the adipose tissue here, which we can see the cells which are yellow in structure, and these yellow colored cells, what you are going to observe in the image is none other than fat cells. So because of the presence of fat cells, we call that particular tissue as what we call adipose tissue. So where we can see this adipose tissue, it can be seen in subcutaneous region, that is below the skin, around the eyes, heart, kidneys, blood vessels. We can see this adipose tissue. What it will do? It forms the shock absorbing cushions around these important organs. And another important function is it also forms an insulating layer below the skin. So it's going to provide certain heat. It's going to provide certain heat regulating mechanism when the body suffers from cold or fever. During that particular time, the body should get warm up because of the presence of this adipose tissue. It also gives shape to various body parts. Another important tissue which comes under this category is, one is called as tendon, another one is the ligament. You are seeing the image of this tendon here. What tendon will do, as you already seen here, the tendon is going to connect between the bone as well as the muscle. So in our body, the bone and muscles are get interconnected by means of a special connective tissue which comes under the category of the areolar connective tissue, which is known as tendon. So tendon is what actually? It's a wide fibrous connective tissue, and the matrix is very small here, and it connects the skeletal to muscle, or what we can see the bone to muscle. It also brings about the contraction and relaxation of the muscles. Another important special tissue is ligament. So ligament, you have heard about the ligament tear. So what is this ligament tear actually? So ligament tear is nothing but whenever we slip or whenever the minor accident happens, normally doctors say that so your ligament has been teared. So the ligament is also a type of tissue which we see in our body which has got high elasticity. So it mainly responsible for bending and rotating movement over a joint. The major function of this tissue is it connects bone to bone. You can see here bone to bone connection in the body is because of ligament tissue, and muscle to bone is because of tendon. It's very important here. Okay, so you can see the image of this ligament tissue where actually it is present in the leg. You can see the image of this ligament tissue. Now let us look into the differences between tendon and ligament now. First, so tendon is a tough and inelastic. Ligament is strong but elastic. Tendon contains the white collagen fibers and those are arranged in parallel. Ligament is having white collagen fibers and are arranged in various directions. Tendon is yellow elastin fibers are absent. In ligament, yellow elastin fibers are present. Because of this, we can differentiate the tendon and ligament, what type of fibers they contain. If it is contain yellow fibers, then it is ligament. If it is not having, it is tendon. And what's the function of tendon? It connects muscle to bone, and ligament, what it do? It connects bone to bone. Now, next important category of the connective tissue is the skeletal connective tissue. Skeletal connective tissue is responsible for protection and support, so they are referred as supportive connective tissue. And here the matrix is solid in nature. Of course, they don't have any gaps here. The cells are compactly arranged, and their all cells are occurred in a fluid-filled space which is known as lacunae. And this skeletal connective tissue will form the endoskeleton of the body. And they are of two types. One is the bone, another one is the cartilage. Now coming to the bone tissue first, we shall look into the features of the bone tissue here. The bone tissue, we know that it is the hardest tissue of the body, and there are 206 bones in our body. It is solid, it is rigid and non-flexible. It contains the cells known as osteocytes. The cells of the bone are referred as osteocytes, and they are present in that fluid-filled space called lacunae. Now this matrix consists of complex proteins called as ossin and mineral matter. Bone cells, actually if you look into the image of the bone cell in the microscope, we can look the cells are arranged in the concentric rings, can be seen in the form of a concentric rings, which are referred as Haversian canals. And bone also contains certain cavities having an internal soft tissue called as bone marrow, which is going to produce the new cells which are called as blood cells. Now look at the image of the bone tissue later now. You can see the image here, where, as I told, the cells are arranged in the concentric circles here, which are called as Haversian canal. And each Haversian canal is lined with these osteocytes, and inside we can see the black spot, which is central cavity, which is known as lacunae, and that is filled with what we call bone marrow, which is going to produce what we call the blood cells. Now, where do we find this bone tissue now? The bone tissue is present throughout the body, of course, and the function is it's going to provide a framework. It's going to give a definite shape to the body. It gives protection to very important organs. It also provides attachment to many muscles, surface for the attachment of many muscles. Next, opposite to this is cartilage. Cartilage is very soft tissue. The matrix is very soft in nature. The cells of the cartilage is known as chondrocytes. And the matrix, as I told, in the case of bone, it is made up of ossin and minerals, whereas it is made up of protein sugar complex called chondrin. And it forms a soft endoskeleton of the body. The location what we can see for this cartilage tissue in our body is, so wherever the soft areas we can come across, those are referred as cartilage. Example is nasal septum, ear pinna, epiglottis, larynx, rings of trachea, and invertebral discs and tips of several bones are cartilage in nature. The cells of the cartilage, as I already told, it is known as chondrocytes. What are the functions of cartilage? And you can see the image of the cartilage tissue here. It provides support and flexibility to various parts of the body. It prevents the frictional wear and tear of the bone tips. The very important next important tissues are referred as what we call vascular connective tissues. As I told, the tissues are responsible for transportation. That's why it is called as vascular, and here the matrix is in fluid nature. And they are of two types. One is the blood, another one is the lymph. So coming to the blood tissue first. The blood, as you know, it is reddish colored, viscous, sticky, saltish vascular tissue which flows inside the blood vessels by means of a pumping activity of the heart. Now this blood tissue has two important parts, which is known as the plasma, another one is the cells, the blood cells. Plasma is fluid in nature, it is of 55%, and blood cells constitute about 45% in this tissue. So what actually it will do? It transports the various substances from one part to the another part. The blood tissue also responsible for regulating the body temperature. It keeps the tissues moist in nature, and it also helps in defense mechanism because it contains WBC cells. You can see here the blood tissue cells. Okay. Next, move on to the lymph tissue of the same category. So lymph is actually called as a colorless tissue. Blood is a colored tissue because it is a hemoglobin pigment, but lymph doesn't have hemoglobin, so it's a colorless tissue. It doesn't contain RBC and it doesn't contain platelets. It contains only a few amount of proteins. As the blood flows through the blood capillaries, lymph also flows through the lymph capillaries. They contain more WBC cells, and that's why they help in defense mechanism. And most of the waste materials passes first through this lymph. Next very important type of tissue what we see in our body is muscular tissue. Now muscular tissue is having a special type of proteins which are called as contractile proteins. And the very important feature of this tissue is that here the matrix is absent. So far we have discussed about matrix. Even in epithelial tissue I have quoted about matrix. Even when I discuss about connective tissue I have told about matrix. But in muscular tissue the matrix is entirely absent. When you look into the cells of the muscular tissue, they are elongated, and that's why those elongated muscle cells are also known as muscle fibers. So this particular tissue occupies about 40% of the total weight of the body, and this is responsible for the contraction and the relaxation of the muscles, and the contraction is because of the presence of a mineral present in the muscle which is known as calcium. Now coming to the categories of the muscular tissues. So muscular tissues are categorized into three major types which depending upon the structure and shape. The one is known as striated muscle fibers, unstriated muscle fibers, and cardiac muscle fibers. Striated muscle fibers, as the name indicate, these muscle fibers will have striations, which means they have stripes, they have bands. Because of the presence of those bands or striations, we call them as striated muscle fibers. And these muscle fibers are cylindrical in nature and they are unbranched fibers. And their ends are blunt in nature. They have oval nucleus which are present towards the peripheral region. And these muscles will work under our control. So they are also called as voluntary muscles. Where do we find these striated muscle fibers then? It can be present in the arms, legs, hands, feet, neck, face, body wall, tongue, etc. In all these areas we can see this striated muscle fibers, and its main function is it brings about the body movements, it controls the mastication and chewing process, it also brings about the breathing movement, and even the blinking of eyes is also presence of this striated muscle. You can see the image of this striated muscle as I already quoted. It is cylindrical in nature, and you can see the oval shaped nucleus which are present towards the peripheral region, and you can see the stripes here. So that's why it is called as striations, or what we can see the striated muscles. Next is unstriated muscles which are not having any stripes or striations. They are referred as spindle shaped muscles, are also called as what we call smooth muscles, because they don't have any striations. The nucleus is present but it is at the center, and these muscles will not work according to our will, so they are called as involuntary muscles, and these muscles will never get fatigue. You can see the location of this unstriated muscles now. It is present in stomach, intestine, ureter, bronchi, lungs, etc. The functions are the peristaltic movement, what we see during the process of digestion is because of unstriped muscles. The absorption of food is because of the presence of these muscles. You can look into the image of the unstriated muscles here. I have told it is spindle shape. The nucleus is at the center and they don't have any striations. Next very important muscles is cardiac muscles. It is present in the heart, which brings about the rhythmic contraction and the relaxation of the body. And these are the muscle fibers which never get fatigue. It is called as non-fatigue muscle fibers. They are involuntary in nature and they are having striations. And they perform the rhythmic contraction, relaxation of the body. You can look into the image of these cardiac muscles. The muscle fibers are cylindrical in nature and they are uninucleate. In each fiber we can see only one nucleus is present and striations are there. The very important feature of these muscle fibers are, you can see here the blue colored line structures. What you are going to see in the image is nothing than intercalated discs are present. Between the two adjacent cells we can see the presence of disc here. So you can see both the image. One is the microscopic view of the cardiac muscles, another one is the sectioning of the cardiac muscle picture. The last important tissue what we see in the animal body is the nerve tissue. So we know that the nerve tissue is very much important because every organism will have one of the most important property called response to stimulus. Now this response to stimulus activity is because of the presence of this nerve tissue. So nerve tissue is nothing have any matrix with it. It doesn't have any matrix. Each cell of the nerve tissue is referred as neurons, and they are considered to be as the longest cell of the body, and they're made up of two important components. One is known as cell body and neurites. Neurites, again, it consists of dendrites and axon. Now you can see the explanation of the nerve tissue here. A single nerve tissue will have the two important components, as I told, the cell body and dendrites and axon. Cell body means it's the beginning part of the nerve tissue. It's a polygonal in shape. It contains nucleus. It is involved in the transmission of impulses. It may be responsible for transmitting whatever we receive the impulses. And it contains two important structures which are known as neurofibrils and nasal granules. Another important continuation part of the neuron is dendrites. Dendrites are once again the small, they are protoplasmic projections which are arising from the cell body and helps in picking the impulses, and the same impulse is being transmitted from the dendrite to the next part of the neuron, which is known as axon. So axon is the longest part of the dendrite which arises from the cell body, and they carry the impulses away from the cell body, and it is the longest dendrite in nature. The very important thing is that as I told, the nervous system in our body is because of the group of this nerve tissue. Many nerve tissues are interconnected. So whenever there are interconnected between the two neurons, there will be a small gap is going to be present. That particular gap which we see between the nerve tissue, and that is a very small gap, and that is known as synapse. Through this gap, a nerve impulse is being transmitted, and it is going to be carried out with the help of a neurotransmitter, that is a chemical substance through which that particular impulses is being. So in our body, the nerve impulses is being carried out in the form of a chemical substances which are referred as neurotransmitters, and those neurotransmitters are transmitted through this gap which is known as synapse. You can see the structure of this neuron here. As I told, the beginning, the polygonal shape is known as the cell body. Inside the cell body, we can see a yellow color structure called as nucleus, and from the cell body we can see a lot of root-like structures or projections are arising, which is known as dendrite, and one of the dendrite is longest in nature, which is known as axon, and ending is what we call nerve ending or axon terminals. Now each axon, as I told here, it is covered with a fatty layer which is oval in shape, which is known as myelin sheath, and this myelin sheath inside contains certain cells known as Schwann cells. So this is the structure of this neuron, and as we have already discussed, each part of the neuron, what actually it will do. And for axon terminal, the cell body of the another neuron is going to be connected. So like this, we can see a lot of nerves are being interconnected in our body. So as I told, the axon terminal of one nerve is connecting with the cyton of the another neuron. So between that there is a gap is present, which is known as synapse. That is called the synapse. So children, with this we completed the animal tissues in detail, and we have also completed the second unit of biology. So next session we shall meet with another new topic. Till then, bye, stay safe, stay healthy.